There was an 18-year-old girl named Beatrice who was in her first year at college. She lived alone in a small apartment near her university. One night, she was washing her dishes after dinner when her phone suddenly started ringing. She picked it up and saw by the caller ID that it was her friend Peter.
Hey Pete, what's up?
She asked.
Not much. I'm just bored and I wanted to see if you'd hang out.
He said.
Sure. Come on over. We could watch a movie or something. Cool. I'll be over in 15 or 20 minutes.
He said cheerfully. She hung up the phone and decided to take a shower before her friend arrived. About 10 minutes later, she was in the middle of shampooing her hair when she heard a loud knock on her front door. Sticking her head out of the shower, she shouted,
Come in. It's open.
After a few minutes later, the banging on the door started again. She stuck her head out again.
It's not locked. Just let yourself in.
Just then, her mobile phone rang. It was Peter. She answered it and said, in an irritated voice,
I'm in the shower. Why don't you stop knocking and just come in?
On the other end of the line, her friend's voice was hushed and urgent.
Don't open the door. Don't open the door.
He said. Beatrice was shocked.
Why not? I'm outside your apartment building. I just saw a strange woman going up the stairs to your apartment. She was crawling up the wall on all fours.
There was a married couple who had one young son. Even before their son was born, the couple's marriage was on shaky ground. As the years went by, the mother and father fought all the time. Their arguments became more frequent and they talked about getting a divorce. In the end, they stayed together for the sake of their son, but the arguments continued and the fights became more and more violent. By the time their son was 5 years old, the couple had grown to hate each other. One night, after they had put the boy to bed, the mother and father got into an enormous argument. The father flew into an insane rage and murdered his wife. When he came to his senses and realized what he had done, he set about disposing of the body. He dragged his wife's corpse into the garage and put her in the boot of his car. Then, he drove out to the mountains. Under cover of darkness, he slung her dead body over his shoulders and carried her out to a marshy swamp nearby. He dragged her out into the foul-smelling muck and watched as her corpse sank into the murky depths. As dawn was beginning to break, he returned home to clean up and take a shower. No matter how much he scrubbed and scrubbed, he couldn't seem to get rid of that sickening smell of the swamp. He slept for a few hours, and when he awoke, he started to think about what he would do if his son asked where the mother was. He decided to tell the boy that his wife had gone to stay with her sister for a while. However, when his young son got up for breakfast, he never mentioned his mother at all. He just stared at his father and said nothing. The man could still smell the odor of the muck from the swamp where he had buried his wife. He took an air freshener and began spraying it around the house, hoping to mask the unpleasant scent. It made him feel sick. A few hours passed and the little boy was watching TV in the living room. The father began to get an uneasy feeling in the pit of his stomach. Every time he went into the living room, he noticed that his son was staring at him with a curious look on his face. It made the father feel nervous and paranoid. His mind was racing. Perhaps the boy knew what had happened, he thought. Maybe the boy overheard him murdering his mother. If his son knew what he had done, perhaps he would have to kill him as well. The father walked into the room, where his son was still watching TV.
Is there something you want to ask me?
He said. The boy thought for a few seconds and then replied, "Yeah,"
Is it about your mother?
asked the father. "Yeah," said the boy.
I suppose you're wondering where your mother is.
Said the father. "No," said the boy. "I'm wondering why Mommy's face is so pale, and why you've been giving her a piggyback all day." One night, a 16-year-old girl was babysitting for two young boys. Their parents weren't due to come home until very late, so she let them stay up and watch some TV. One of the boys was flipping channels when he came to an emergency news bulletin. The reporter said that a crazed murderer had escaped from a nearby insane asylum and was on the run from the local authorities. He was believed to be in the area and was armed with a hatchet. The police cautioned residents to lock their doors and windows because the man was extremely dangerous. The young boys began to panic, and the babysitter didn't want them to get upset, so she put them to bed early. As she tucked them in, they kept asking her if she had locked all the doors and windows. She assured them that she would lock everything. Then she went back downstairs and resumed watching television. Sometime later, one of the boys was awoken by a loud crash. He wasn't sure if it was his imagination, so he sat up in bed and listened intently. After a while, he began to hear weird sounds coming from downstairs. He wondered if he was just letting his imagination run away with him. Maybe it was just the sound of the babysitter watching television downstairs. The boy heard the sound again and woke his brother. Together, they listened at the door to the bedroom. The boys began to shake with fear. Terrified, they pushed their beds up against the door and barricaded themselves inside their bedroom. The sounds eventually stopped, but the boys were too afraid to leave the safety of their bedroom. For hours, they cowered in their bedroom, with their beds jammed securely against the door. Later that night, when the boys' parents returned, they were shocked to find a gruesome scene. There was a trail of blood leading from the hallway all the way up the stairs. In a panic, the mother screamed out her sons' names. When the two boys heard their mother calling, they pulled back their beds and opened their bedroom door. Lying at the top of the stairs, in a pool of her own blood, was their babysitter. Her arms had been cut off at the elbows and her legs had been cut off at the knees. She had used her bloody stumps to drag herself up the stairs, trying to warn them. Now, that's one dedicated babysitter. There was a young girl who was in need of a job, was able to find work as a babysitter for a couple who lived in a large, isolated old house. They were going out to see a movie that night and left the teenage babysitter in charge of their 3 young children. The babysitter put the children to bed when it got too late and then went downstairs to watch some television. She was just getting comfortable when she heard the phone ringing. When she answered it, all she heard was heavy breathing, followed by a man's voice asking,
"Have you checked on the children?"
Freaked out, she hung up the phone, trying to convince herself that it was just someone playing a practical joke on her. She went back to watching television, but about 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. She picked up the receiver and heard hysterical laughter from the other end of the line. Then the same voice asked,
"Why haven't you checked on the children yet?"
The babysitter slammed down the phone. The poor girl was frightened out of her wits and immediately called the police. The operator at the police station told the babysitter that if the man called again, she should try to keep him talking. That would give the police time to trace the call. A few minutes later, the phone rang a third time, and when the babysitter answered it, she heard the heavy breathing again. The voice on the line said,
"You should really check on the children."
The babysitter listened to him laughing hysterically for a long time. She hung up the phone again, and almost immediately, it rang again. This time it was the operator from the police station who yelled,
"Get out of the house right now! The call's coming from upstairs!"
The babysitter dropped the phone in shock, and suddenly she heard heavy footsteps walking down the stairs. Without pausing for a second, she ran out of the house as fast as her legs could carry her. Just as she closed the front door behind her, a man's hand slammed against the glass. She screamed and ran out into the street just as a police car was pulling up outside. The police searched the house and found the two children upstairs, hiding in a closet, crying uncontrollably. In the parents' bedroom, they found a bloody axe lying on the floor next to the upstairs phone. The back window was wide open and the curtains were blowing in the breeze. There was no sign of the madman who had made the phone calls. He had escaped into the night. When the police officers arrived, they managed to interrupt his horrible plan to kill the two children and the poor babysitter.